Welcome to today's video. I'm going to be going over the Dev Insights article that just came out today about Season 22 abilities and some of the new exotic armor changes and ability changes. It's got some new information on what they plan to do with some exotics that have been underused. And it's also got some kind of sad information for some of the ability changes just based on the way that they did them. I feel like they were kind of on the right track, but they didn't exactly nail it. And of course, poor Titans, they're getting their most abused abilities nerfed. So, rip Titans, but, Void's still good. Obviously, there's going to be some changes. The new exotic changes that are coming out might spark some new builds in PvP that are a little bit more trolly or a little bit more up a Titan's alley. Now they just can't abuse Arc, and they can't abuse the Arc subclass. So, here's their day in the sun. Every class has had something like that at one point or another, and that's just it. It's time for the Titans to come back to Earth. So let's start out. And so what they said here is that for the hunters, they're going to be changing the Knucklehead radar, and they're going to remove completely the functionality from Foe Tracer and apply that to the Knucklehead radar. So you're going to have that additional radar, and then you're also going to have that tracking ability on top of it. So Knucklehead radar is going to be a nice kind of a neutral game exotic, where it doesn't necessarily give you any new abilities or anything as far as changing the way that your kit plays, but it will give you more information, and that's going to be nice for like a lot of newer PvP players that are having trouble tracking players or kind of understanding where players are going to be coming around corners and stuff. If you get that tag and you get that little mark, kind of tracking them through walls and stuff, that'll be a nice training tool for new players, and also has a high skill ceiling for players that are really good with sniping and such, so they can pre-fire and things like that. They completely reworked Foe Tracer, of course, since they've already removed the functionality from that. What they're doing is they're kind of giving it like a Sanguine Alchemy style setup, but more versatile. And so they, like it says here, that they took cues from Monocratic Maestro artifact perk, and when you deal damage with one of your abilities, you gain a damage bonus with weapons that have the same subclass type. And so like if you're on a solar subclass with a solar weapon, you get that additional damage. And additionally, when you deal when you defeat an enemy, should I say, with one of your abilities, either an ability with a weapon or with a damage type matching the subclass, you'll spawn collectibles such as Ionic Trace, Fire Sprites, Void Breach, things like that. I hope a Void Breach, because that would be actually nice if it was set up where you can get the kill with an ability, spawns a Void Breach, and then that'll proc Devour and things like that, depending on your artifact next season. So, Lucky Raspberry, that one was kind of inconsistent, like they said here. So what they did is they tried to make it more consistent, and instead of having these really big spikes and getting all your grenade back when you hit like 3 or 4 or 5 things, they're going to give you like a more steady increase of your grenade abilities. And when you pair that with some additional ability boosting armor mods, this actually might make for a nice build, especially since some of the changes toward the end of the article here you'll see make it to where the arc bolt grenades are a little bit more utility. And so it basically still gives you the chaining ability for arc bolt grenades, but instead of basing the grenade energy on how many times it chains, you each time you damage an enemy with the lightning strikes from the jolted condition, as well as each time you pick up an Ionic Trace, which is going to be really nice for builds that create Ionic Traces. It's going to be really great for the Delicate Tomb, for example, or Cold Heart, which are going to be builds that will allow you to use those weapons to create Ionic Traces. When you do that, you get additional grenade energy, so this can also be kind of grenade ability spam, similar to how I use the Shinobu's Vow, and I run around killing stuff and spamming grenades and just getting my grenades back instantly. This might be that way with arc bolt grenades. And what's additional with this one is they've given the grenade the intrinsic ability to stun overload champions. Now they're not clear as if the arc bolt grenade is going to do it regardless of if you have this on or not. It sounds as if, to me, the way I'm reading it is maybe you have to have the Lucky Raspberry exotic on, but if it's without the Lucky Raspberry exotic on, that's a nice versatility. So I hope it's without, but you never know. And so now you don't have to jolt them to trigger it, you just hit them with the grenade. Normally you would have to jolt them first and then shoot them to create the lightning strike to stun them. So now as soon as you hit them with the grenade, it triggers it, and then it makes it a reliable tool for overloads, and hopefully it stuns them reliably, unlike some of the weapons where they take forever sometimes and they don't stun and then they get their health back through it. So hopefully that's going to make for a nice reliable way to stun these overload champions and also free up your build so that you can have an additional weapon slot where that would normally be taken up by one of the overload weapons that you have to set up for that particular GM. So the renewal grasps are next, and what they've done is they've undone the previous nerf to dust field grenades. So now if you're using, for example, like Grenader Jake uses this build a lot where he's running around with Stasis Hunter, and he's using the Dustfield grenades as kind of a defensive tool, offensive tool, to prevent people from using abilities when close, or to prevent them from using abilities to get away. You can use the renewal grasps and still have that additional benefit when you are in close of standing next to them and getting a slight damage reduction. It's not going to be like it used to, obviously, where you can tank everything, but any little bit counts, and sometimes that could turn the fight around. Now for Titans, here comes what the Titans are getting as far as exotics. So the Icefall Mantle, the Doomfang Pauldrons, Path of Burning Steps, and Eternal Warrior have had some additional changes. Since Season 21, they've included some changes to Eternal Warrior and the Path of Burning Steps. They've added an escalated damage bonus to arc and solar weapons, respectively, and when you get kills with those damage types. They liked that this gave players another way to get surge-like bonuses, but the Eternal Warrior seems to have the most reliable way to get up to tier 4, so they made some changes to further allow these perks to get them a little bit more reliable, while also extending the functionality of 2 other exotics. So Icefall Mantle, they've granted you an escalating bonus to stasis weapon damage when getting rapid stasis kills, and when you activate your class ability, you immediately gain the highest tier bonus, which is nice. So not only are you going to have that additional kind of tankiness, but you'll also be dealing more damage, so it's just kind of a nice power up overall. Doomfang Pauldrons, it's going to grant you an escalating bonus to void weapon damage when getting rapid void kills, and when you get a void melee kill, you immediately grant the highest tier bonus as well. So that's going to be nice for content where you can push through a ton of enemies, a lot of enemy density, and then you'll have your uptime on that going really well. I can see this being nice, like if you're doing like something where you're running like an SMG, like kind of bringing back like old funnel web builds and stuff like that. That can end up being something nice next season, depending on what the artifact has for void, if anything. Path of Burning Steps, they're getting a solar grenade kill now gets you the highest solar weapon damage bonus, and so even though I'm sure Asaros may not still be happy because he really liked the prior version of Path of Burning Steps, this is still going to be a nice little benefit if you're running a build that does actually use a solar grenade to do damage. A lot of the builds that I run lately have been survival builds with solar, so I'm actually running a healing grenade, so this doesn't really help me, but for somebody that does run other grenades, that might be nice. And the Eternal Warrior, since the exotic only grants its highest tier damage bonus automatically when your super ends, which is rare, the duration of arc weapon damage bonus when your Fist of Havoc super ends is extended to 30 seconds, up from 10 seconds. Now, the feedback fence has gotten a complete rework. It's tied into the armor charge system, and so they're supposed to be making it more versatile in scenarios where you might not be taking a lot of melee damage. So with the new perk, which completely replaces the old perk, when melee hits give you an armor charge, you take reduced damage while you have that armor charge. Taking melee damage causes you to emit a burst of damaging arc energy that jolts the target, consuming your armor charge and dealing more damage based on the number of stacks consumed. Note the damage dealt by the burst of the arc energy should be comparable to its current damage for 0 to 3 stacks of armor charge. And so this one actually could be nice to also throw onto like a Strand build, so when you're running in there and you're doing a lot of your melees for Strand and you're getting the Woven Mail up, on top of that, once you do get hit, somebody melees you for example, you end up kicking out that jolt energy, stacking on top of your Strand stuff, and then from there that'll consume some of your armor charges. I kind of don't like that it consumes the armor charge. I would have rather liked it to be one of those scenarios where when you build up armor charges you have it based on that and then it just runs out when the armor charge runs out. Consuming the armor charge kind of is counter on this one, and so it still may keep some people from using it just because of that, because you have other desires for your armor charges a lot of times with weapon damage and stuff like that. So I don't know if this one's going to still be good with that. It may still not be used because of the consumption of armor charge, and they may have to like rework that, but at least they tried. The Hallowfire Heart, though, is going to be interesting coming up next season. So this exotic, it says it often stands in the shadow of the more ubiquitous Heart of Inmost Light, which is true. Heart of Inmost Light is better in every way. To remedy that, we've removed its base energy to solar abilities and replaced it with a perk that will let you build more into sunspots. So they're just going to blanket the world with sunspots, kind of a burn the world build. We think you'll be seeing many more sunspots on the battlefield as a result, and as for the perk that greatly increases your ability regen when the super is fully charged, we left that as is. So that's going to be pretty interesting to see how that's going to work, and if you can fight moving sunspot to sunspot while also getting that additional ability recharge rate. And so this will be an ability spam exotic that might work out really well, especially with some of the survival builds. So we'll see. And now with Warlocks, this one is really interesting. And this one's funny because they just added this one in. This is edited on 8/9/23 at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So they've added 2 more pieces of functionality to the exotic. So enemies near you, when you blink, become volatile. Additionally, when you're using the new Nova Up super, the Dark Blink ability no longer consumes super energy. Earlier in the article, it had it to where you could like blink in, and then when you blink away, it detonates. So I think that maybe somebody got a little bit more uh, kind of ahead of themselves with how it works, and they just kind of simplified it. And so the idea is that you're in a group of enemies, you blink and they become volatile, and then in the earlier article, it said that you could turn around and then detonate those, and then everything would blow up all around you. And so they were just probably talking about how that would work. Like you blink in there, you blink away, everything's volatile. You turn around, you get a kill, and then boom, everything blows up in a small radius. Now, this big one though, when you're using the Nova Warp Super, the Dark Blink ability no longer consuming super energy, that's actually really key because a lot of times you would spend time running people down with your held Dark Blink. So you got your Nova Warp and you've got the orb held, and you're running around blinking and you're using energy as it goes, and you may only get like one or two good explosions in. So now you should be able to move around the battlefield a lot more fluidly while holding on to your abilities and getting in there and getting more use out of that. So that's pretty cool, and also that'll work for higher end content because that can get you away from stomps like boss stomps, champion stomps, stuff like that. So that might be really nice. The Geomag stabilizers. Now, while they've often heard calls to restore the perk that lets you top off the super energy by sprinting, the legacy of that incentive still creates some pretty silly patterns, like people running into walls and stuff. They would run circles around a pillar or like run away from you and then turn around and try to hit you with it. So I like the change. It's not necessarily going to be like super PvE based, but instead what they did is no matter how charged the super is, picking up an ionic trace while wearing the exotic will grant additional super energy. So this is going to be like a super build where you're trying to get down to like 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute supers, like consistently, and you want to try to make sure that you're maxing your ionic traces. And so the idea behind this is probably going to be to use your super, kill everything, cancel it early so that you still keep that little bit of super in the end, and then run around maxing out super again. So you may have like a super every minute, minute and a half based on the way that this sounds. So hopefully they give it an appropriate amount of super energy and it's not like undertuned when it first comes out. I would like this one to be a little bit more hot because you really can't take advantage of it too much in PvP. It's just going to be a PvE thing, and that would make the arc stuff fun. Although the downside is that next season, since they've been focusing on Void and Arc this season with Strand as kind of a backup in the artifact, I don't know, are they going to have Arc next season too? That would be kind of interesting to see if they still had some Arc, but it sounds like based on the way that they've done things before, Arc may be the one to fall off, and then Solar is going to take its place. So who knows? Who knows what we're looking at next season? They haven't released that information yet. Now, Wings of Sacred Dawn sounds really cool. So they're going to be leaning into the orbital weapons platform fantasy, like AC-130 fantasy. We want to help players have a way to stay aloft longer, especially in target-rich PvE environments. Typically, reloading was the main cause for a float to end. This exotic now automatically reloads solar weapons, including the weapon you're holding, from reserves each time you get a kill while aiming down sights. So try this one out with Xenophage, and you can use that with a lot of weapons. You can use that with the like a lot of the solar scouts and things like that. If you're trying to stay back and still do your damage, like Polaris Lance is going to be really cool, especially how that may interact with the perfect shots where you're getting the explosions, and then the Cabal launcher as well. That's going to be really nice to have the Skyburner's Oath. I was trying to think of the name. And so you're running around Skyburner's Oathing people, and then you're getting your ammo back with that. And I'm not looking forward to the toaster being used in the air like that over and over and over again, and people just yotening down on people. But that might be a thing, and so it just sounds like it's going to be a really nice setup. And so if you have a favorite solar weapon that you can use from the air, this is going to be your thing. And like they said, Xenophage is going to be working out real nice. I don't know if it's going to be much better than right now when you're running like Xenophage and you're doing the air dodge with the Rain of Fire, because that's really, really strong. So we'll see if that's going to compete with the DPS wise. So Winter's Guile. Now, due to the nature of Stasis Warlock's melee abilities, this exotic was previously a disappointing choice for that subclass. We've added a new perk, so specifically when you're playing on the Stasis subclass, now combatants encased in your Penumbral Blast may automatically shatter after a short delay. And they specifically said combatants versus like enemies, so I don't think this is going to work in PvP, which kind of sucks because that would actually be really valuable in PvP if you got a Penumbral Blast on somebody and it was like an instant kill, especially if even if they needed to put like a cooldown on it or something, like so where you couldn't just like do it over and over again if you've got like two stored melees or something like that in some other way. So I think that it's kind of sad that they didn't do that in PvP if that's the case, because that would be a nice need for Winter's Guild. Because I don't even think there's a way to actually do two-sword melees, because you'd have to use the other arms exotic for that. So it's not that overpowered, I don't think, to have it to where you just have like a one and done insta kill with the Warlock melee ability. And to be honest, if you're already hit by the Penumbral Blast, you're usually going to die anyways, because you just get a follow up kill with a special weapon, or you just shoot them and then they're going to die anyway. So it's not like they're saving anybody. It just saves you from having to close the gap on them if you get a nice skill shot with your Penumbral Blast. Especially like if you were using it to shut down a super or something, that would be really nice as a super shutdown, and you're holding Winter's Guile specifically for that. So I don't know. It should have been available in PvP. I know people would have cried about it, but it would have been a nice change, just something new. So it says here, as with many changes we make, we're going to be watching the data and your feedback carefully, and they may make additional tuning changes accordingly. It says they're already working on a next round of exotics for future seasons, so stay tuned for that. So now we're going to be moving on to the abilities preview. So it says here, hey folks, combat gameplay team here to run through the ability changes coming with Season 22. Before we get into the actual changes, let's go over the goals for the release. And so they're going to reduce the uptime and potency of barricade abilities, particularly in high-level PvP, Trials of Osiris. They're going to reduce the potency of Striker Titan in high-level PvP, both in the neutral game and when supers come up. And they're going to correct the one-size-fits-all nature of suspend in the combat sandbox, which that was kind of sad. I mean, I see the changes and I see why they wanted to make them, and I'll go over kind of what I think they should have done there. And the rebalance of our Strand fragment suite to bring some underperforming options up and normalize the potency of overperformers. So starting off with Barricade, this ability is a potent tool for closing off lanes, buckling under fire, creating safe spaces to get a revive, and gathering information from relative safety. In PvP specifically, the prevalence of barricades can slow down the pace of play in a manner that doesn't have much in the way of meaningful counterplay, which is true because, again, if you're just sitting there looking at a Titan behind a barricade and they've just got like 3 or 4 barricades back to back to back to back, you can try to flank, but then they can barricade that, and then they're just going to peek through the barricade with snipers and peek the sides of the barricades. So it does get annoying, and it kind of just, you have to, like, if you're trying to play quick, you have to play around the Titans positioning in their barricades. You can't just like go somewhere else and wait for them, for example. So it is kind of annoying in that aspect. It does slow down the pace of the game, unlike anything else, because like a Hunter Dodge won't do that, other than maybe like a Worm Husk, but even then it's just a few seconds where they have their shields back. And the only thing close to that is a Warlock Rift, Stag Rift maybe, that they're around the corner building up their overshield and they peek from there. That's the only thing that's even close to a Titan's potency, and the Titan gets it way faster as well, with also getting the benefit of high resilience. So there's just too much stacking behind resilience for the Titans going on for the kind of a free game-changing ability as the barricade was. So it's understandable why they changed it. And so it says, and for a while they've also been experimenting with opt-in ways around barricades, so like getting anti-barrier rounds in your weapons, or having them on exotic, using origin traits to pop the barriers quicker, for example, but then those weapons weren't the optimal weapons. Giving subclass buffs, tuning damage to special weapons so that special weapons deal more damage to barricades, but again, you're burning your special for something that they're getting for free for just having 10 resilience. And those are all meant to increase an attacker's ability to remove barricades from the equation. However, it's clear that in the heat of the moment, these kind of out-of-combat decisions aren't really coming into play, and especially since they made the changes where if you switch some things around, like you switch your exotic, you lose all your abilities and stuff, so it's kind of frustrating there. And so we're making some base level changes across the board, different barricade abilities, primarily targeting the strength of barricades. And so they're trying to reduce the barricade strength. In Season 22, Towering Barricade's base cooldown will be increasing significantly, and all barricade objects will receive a reduction in their maximum health pool. And so Towering Barricade, they're going to increase the base cooldown from 48 seconds to 70 seconds, which is not too long, but it's just enough where you can kind of keep from having like a loop of barricade to barricade to barricade. I'm sure they tested that out. And for all barricades, they're reducing the maximum health from 600 to 500. And then in PvE, of course, so that you're not hurt in PvE by the PvP changes, they're going to increase its damage resistance for its PvE combatants. So it's probably roughly going to take about the same amount of damage for pops. At this time, they're not extending the Towering Barricade cooldown to Bastion, because Bastion already has a cooldown of 100. That's the Void Overshield shield. However, the maximum health reduction does apply, so it brings the effective HP against players from 500 to 417, and then players deal additional 20% damage to Bastion barricades already, which is why it's 417 instead of 500. It says next up on Striker Titan, it probably won't surprise you to hear that Striker Titan has been significantly overperforming in high-level PvP activities like trials. While they believe that a small portion of this is due to a strong focus on Arc and the seasonal artifact, they also believe that the base kit has a few elements that are too strong, which is an understatement. We've made recent changes to both of these atoms, but neither their prevalence nor performance is meaningfully shifted, so they're going to take another swing at Thunder Crash and Knockout. So theoretically, Thunder Crash is a one-off super, but in practice, it's got a kill potential closer to that of a roaming super, so they're updating its base cooldown to reflect that, and that's true because you're basically running around with the super that's ready to go. You can use it at any time. It's hard to kill somebody when they pop it right away, and if you're anywhere near them, they can also run through you, getting additional kills instead of just getting a one-and-done kill or killing people close together. They can burn people as they're flying through them and then still get the kill. And even with the changes where they made it to where you have to be kind of closer to that person, especially like on PC, I play on PC, it's still not that difficult to catch people as they're in the air because you're kind of a easier target in the air, and you tend to be in the air against a person with their super anyways because you don't want to be on the ground to avoid the slam attack whenever it hits the ground. And so it says here, is damage dealt and received as a primary factor in super regeneration rates, particularly in PvP. They believe this change will be felt most strongly in low player count PvP, like trials and competitive, without being too disruptive for PvE strikers. So Thunder Crash has its base cooldown increased from 500 to 556, matching the majority of the roaming supers, which is what they were talking about it being a roaming super. It says, well, we want Striker to live up to its fantasy of being a close quarters powerhouse. Knockout is currently too forgiving in letting players clean up engagements with melee attacks early in a duel, especially when combined to other melee enhancing atoms. So for Season 22, they're going to be reducing its damage bonus against players, but they'll be keeping a close eye on whether that should remain for future adjustments. And so for Knockout, they reduced the damage bonus versus players from 50 to 30, and I think that that's okay, but I think that that's not good enough. And so I want to go over the two changes before we move on the barriers and the knockout. So for barriers, it would be nice if they got the barriers and instead of necessarily making them weaker, they reduce maybe their duration that they're out, and then also they rounded them off a little bit on the edges and on the top. So right now it's kind of like a wall with like a slight curve, but if they made it more kind of oval, so where it kind of peaks in a little bit more, it covers less side to side, so it forces the Titan to kind of be a little bit tighter, and also it avoids, that curve will avoid some of that peaking, because if they try to peek around this rounded edge that rounds back in, they're not going to have so much coverage or a peeker's advantage because the barricade isn't there anymore. So it's going to help cut down on a lot of that side peeking that Titans do with snipers and things like that. And then having it slightly over their head, that prevents somebody from just running up to a Titan and then shotgunning straight down and killing them if they're lower skilled. And that it also prevents higher skilled Titans from just baiting that in and then just waiting with the shotgun, holding the angle, and as soon as somebody's like torso is above the shield, they just shoot them. That'll block them from doing that. They actually have to jump up and out of their barricade to get that hit, which then will lower their accuracy, and so that kind of evens out a little bit of the pushing. So having a nice rounded barricade would have been a little bit better in that scenario, and that would also work nice for Titans who are trying to like barricade in a corner, because then they're like fully covered at that point and they can turtle up, which is it'd be kind of funny to see that, of course. So that's what I would do with the barricades, is lower their duration that they're out, and then also round them off a little bit so that they're not quite as useful for peak shooting and giving a peeker's advantage, for example. And also on the edges too, I would make it a little bit more shoot through on the edges so that you don't get that situation where your shot is blocked. Like if a Titan's head is halfway sticking out of the barricade, you should be able to get a headshot on that Titan. And knockout, I think they should also reduce the lunge range on knockout as well. That's one of the bigger problems with knockout, is not that it does so much damage, but that you have a huge lunge range, and then of course you get your health back on a kill with knockout. They could leave the health damage alone, or they could make it to where like you don't regenerate health on a kill, or if you do regenerate health, you don't get all of it back, you just get like a small bump, like you get like a set amount of health back per kill, for example. So you do get some health, but it's not going to like top you up to where you have full health. They could have done a number of things, but definitely lowering the lunge range is something that I would have done on that. So now we're going to move over to Strand. And so it's basically talking how Strand has been performing with how it's shaken up the sandbox, and they're going to talk about suspend. And so they believe that currently suspend is like a skeleton key that solves a lot of combat problems against all combatant types. Its current duration heavily steps on the toes of stasis freeze, which they want to be the highest potency disable in the sandbox. And the uptime of suspend doesn't allow for decision making when choosing when and where to place a hard disable. To address these problems, they're going to be making a suite of changes across both suspend and its supporting atoms to better carve out a healthier role for suspend in the sandbox. The base duration of suspend is being reduced significantly, and they've further reduced it against champion combatants to ensure they remain a core focus in combat, a problem for the fire team survivability that needs to be addressed with urgency. And so we're also reducing the energy generation granted by Threat of Mind and Threat of Generation, and they don't believe that the ability uptime of these two fragments grant to suspending items in a healthy way for the sandbox. And so we're going to look at suspend based on their changes. They're going to reduce the suspend duration versus non-champions from 8 seconds to 5 seconds, which is completely fine. That's not a big deal. Most non-champion combatants are dead within that time frame. Threat of continuity now extended from 7 down from 12, so that's fine too. I mean, again, if something is alive for 7 seconds after you suspended it, you're taking a little bit too long to kill it. Now, here's where some of the issues happen, though. Like, I don't agree with them reducing the base suspend duration versus champions from 8 to 3 and 4 seconds with threat of continuity. Yes, you should be able to kill a champion pretty fast, but like 8 seconds was fine. Like, the amount of time a champion was suspended was fine. And if you are going to bring it down, at least bring it down to like 5 seconds to match everything else, to kind of just treat them equally instead of giving them this 3-second duration. And the reason why I say that's a problem is because we're using suspend against the unstoppable champions, and unstoppable champions have this cooldown where if you spend them once, you try to suspend them again, they won't cool down. And so I can see this leading to a situation where you stunned a champion, unstoppable champion, and then you go and you try to suspend them, and they either like run straight through the suspend, for example, because sometimes that doesn't work on them, it's just buggy, or they'll suspend but they won't get stunned, and so then you have them up in the air, but you're not getting that additional bonus damage, and they're still tanky from their resistances. So unless they make it to where suspend overrides the unstoppable champion's cooldown and immediately stuns them again, making them take normal damage, that's going to kind of waste the ability of having suspend in the first place that stuns unstoppable champions. So kind of shitty there. I don't like that change, and I hope that if they did make this change and that does go through, that they're going to address the unstoppable champions and the way that they stun and have a stun cooldown. They're going to also increase snap damage dealt to suspended boss combatants by 67%. So I don't understand. Again, that's probably not necessary, but it's neither here nor there. That doesn't make too much of a difference. It's not like you're killing stuff with suspend snap damage. And so Threat of Mind, this is going to reduce the class energy gain based on the tier of the defeated target. So minor combatants went from 15 to 10, which is fine. Major combatants from 25 to 15, which is kind of meh. I think that should be 20%. And then boss champions and mini bosses were reduced from 50 to 25%. I think that's a bad change. There's only so many bosses, champions, and mini bosses in the game, and so if you do get a suspend off of them, if you're saving your suspend for those, you should get a big boost. So maybe it should have been 40%. Personally, they should have just left it alone at 50%, but I think 40% would have been fine, because again, how often are you going to get those anyways in the first place? And then when you do get a suspend on them, it's only 25%, so I don't like that change. That's a little bit too much, I think. They're a little bit too overboard on that one. And then Threat of Generation, they're going to reduce the overall energy gain per damage event against PvE enemies about 20%. They're going to rebalance the energy gain multiplier across primary weapon archetypes. They wanted to bring the energy gains for dealing damage with precision weapons and fully automatic weapons closer together, so that way you can't spam fully automatic weapons and get more than precision weapons. They're going to try to make them sure that they're like a little tighter between each other on the gain itself. And then overall, they've reduced the efficiency for fully automatic primary weapons and increased the efficiency of precision primary weapons to compensate for the differences. So in combination with these changes to suspend, they wanted to shift some of the potency of other Strand things to allow more diverse option for Strand users. In particular, they're increasing the power of Threadlings and Sever in PvE and increasing the availability of Tangles across all modes. And Tangles is a big deal. I do want to talk about that in a little bit too when we get into the Warlock Tangles. So Threadlings, they've increased the Threadling damage versus PvE by 30%, which is good, but they also need to increase the tracking and reliability of them. Until they can do that, yeah, that's nice, 30% is nice, but sometimes they like blow up on their own, or they end up bumping into each other and blowing each other up and stuff, and they said they fixed it, but it's still not perfect. Tangles, they've reduced the tangle creation time from 15 to 12, which is a nice change, and so you can create tangles more quickly back to back. For Sever, they've also adjusted it to where PvE combatants affected by Sever now have outgoing damage reduced by 40%, so they've increased that damage reduction by 10%, which is nice. And they're also going to be taking the opportunity to address feedback on a handful of Strand abilities and aspects. The Threadrunner Silk Strike Super is a bit unforgiving in the live game, particularly in PvP, so they made changes to improve its usability, and they're going to continue to monitor it to make changes as necessary. So for Silk Strike, they've increased the damage distance by 5%, so 45% from 40. They've reduced the suppression time between Silk Strike Super air attacks, so you can do them more consistently back to back. And they've reduced the vertical lift provided by Silk Strike's heavy air attack to reduce instances of missing the primary target, meaning it won't spin across their head, so you don't get so high off the ground when you do it. And while the Threadrunner's Threaded Spectre aspect is performing well in PvP, it needed a little TLC in PvE, so it should now be much more effective in PvE as it holds enemies' attention longer, and the Casting Hunter is now effectively invisible to enemies for a couple seconds after creating the clone. That's going to be a really nice build. We already have a decent Threaded Spectre build, and so that's going to be nice to see how it runs with the additional Threaded Spectre changes. So they're going to increase the lifetime of the Threaded Spectre to 12 seconds. They're increasing its health versus PvE combatants, so it's going to last longer and hold their attention longer. It also takes longer to detect PvE combatants at the beginning of its lifetime, meaning it won't miss PvE combatants grabbing their attention. And PvE combatants will now more consistently focus on the Threaded Spectre instead of the Hunter, which is fantastic. Hopefully, especially when it comes to like beam attacks and stuff, where they won't accidentally hit you at the same time as your Threaded Spectre and still get damage and kill you. Allied players are now no longer having the reticle magnetism drawn toward the Threaded Spectre, so that's going to help console players especially, because if you're trying to shoot an enemy and the Threaded Spectre pulls your shot away, that's kind of annoying, especially on weapons that have limited ammo. And so Broodweavers, they're going to have the wandering aspect increased because it's strong when thrown, but it's somewhat more difficult to use in situations where you have to go out and grab a tangle in a bad situation, a bad place. You don't want to like run up in front of a champion just to grab the tangle and then to try to throw it, and then sometimes you get stomped and killed. So in this case, destroying a tangle with your weapon will now weave the Wanderer, which will surge upward and detonate and suspend anything nearby. So if there is a tangle next to a champion, you can just pop the tangle and then boom, you get your detonation and your suspension. And they've also increased the detonation range and damage as well. So the Wanderer destroying a tangle now creates a delayed suspending detonation, increasing suspended detonation radius from 6 to 7 meters versus PvE combatants, which is good. And then they increased the thrown Wanderer tangle detonation damage to match regular tangles, which I didn't even know that it was reduced, so that's a good thing. They've heard feedback that the Strand grapple melee isn't working as intended as well, particularly for hunters and warlocks with range melee abilities. So now pressing your melee input consistently activates the grapple melee lunge instead of your charged melee. And so basically when you're doing your charged melee ability, if you have that with the same setup where you're grappling and then you're trying to get that grapple punch at the end, that will take priority. Now going back to the tangles, I think one change they also need to make, especially if you've got the Wanderer aspect on, is to make it to where allies cannot pick up your tangles, because that ruins your entire thing. Like, your whole aspect is to go and pick up a tangle and then throw it to get the bonuses, but if your ally throws it, then it doesn't get it. And so either it make it to where your ally picks up your tangle and your ally gets the Wanderer benefits, or make it to where your allies can't pick up your tangle or explode your tangle, for example. That would, to me, be the better way to go about it, because people can't throw you off. Like, you've got your build, you've got your idea of what you're going to do with it, you know what your tangle's going to do. Having them to where, unless they created the tangle, they can't mess with it would be better. I don't know how much harder it is in the coding, but another compromise is that if they throw your tangle, it has the Wanderer's abilities tied to it still, so at least it's not wasted. They can pick up your tangle, and they can use your Wanderer ability tangle. That would also be a nice change to make sure that it's just not a wasted thing to have the buffed tangle. And now, it says, mentioned above, while shifting some of the power of suspend to other Strand atoms, they took the opportunity to make some of the Strand fragments that correspond with threadlings and several more attractive picks. And so here are some of the changes. Thread of propagation, they've moved the 10 plus 10 strength off of continuity to that, so as continuity no longer gets plus 10 strength. And then the thread of wisdom, it no longer requires a precision kill to activate. which is good, so you can just get it in general. And then the threat of isolation, reduce the number of precision hits required to activate by about 30%. Varies by the weapon archetype, so who knows, that may make a big difference. I don't feel that 30% is that huge, but we'll see when the numbers come out. And then the threat of rebirth, the number of created threatenings now increases based on the number, or based on the tier of defeated targets. So a minor combatant is 1, elite is 2, boss and champion or mini boss is 3. And so that's nice. That is a nice change, especially if you're killing a boss, champion, or mini boss, and then have those threadlings come out, which do deal more damage. And again, if they are more reliable and they seek and kill more reliably, that's going to be even better. And so it says here, all this is coming in Season 22, and some changes as well are also on the way. Tune in on launch day for a full list of changes and bug fixes, including a fix to Celestial Fire Scorch not activating melee perks like Sunbracers, which is fantastic. That's been a bug for quite a while that they've been trying to hammer out. And while Season 22 is getting locked in, we're working on a suite of 23 changes as well, and we'll have more to share about Season 23 at a later date, but in the meantime, we'll be keeping an eye out for your feedback on all these Season 22 changes. And so hopefully they do see this feedback, and also if you have some suggestions, throw them in the comments as well, just in case this video does get viewed by somebody at Bungie looking around, kind of crawling the internet for these suggestions and feedbacks. Hopefully my feedback gets addressed to some of the things that need to be done to really make these changes make a difference. It's always a lot easier for a player that plays regularly to suggest these things than a play tester who only does this for a living and has other things to do with their time. So that's why a lot of the cheeses and bugs don't get found until after the fact, because these people that find them just have a ton of time to just go out and try these things, and they have the patience to do so as well. And so thanks very much for watching this video to the end. Again, if you have any additional suggestions that you may think hopefully Bungie could see, throw them in the comments. That way we can get them out there, and hopefully we get some of the changes that we need made to kind of take these changes over the top and make them as appropriate as they can be. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.